Most people think that sailing and cruising is all about the open water and exploring the world and no rules. It's just you on the sea. But in fact, maritime laws have some of the oldest and weirdest laws still on the books today. And, they can affect you. Many people don't think about these things. It's everything from the Coast Guard's right to board your vessel to salvage myths and the cost of that. And then, did you know you might even get a fine or a ticket for having a tattered flag hanging up? So in this podcast, I'm going to go over these quirky maritime laws and maybe make you rethink your next voyage. So let's dive into some of the weird rules of the sea. We're going to start off with one that I think probably most seasoned sailors know for sure, but a lot of people don't understand. They think that okay, if you're driving in your car and you get pulled over by the police, they don't have the right to search your car unless they have probable cause. Do they smell something that makes them think there's something's going on? Can they see something that looks a little weird and they have probable cause to think there's a crime been committed? So that's the way, or they get a warrant from a judge. But the Coast Guard, thanks to the Revenue Act of 1790, is allowed to board your vessel no matter what. And I'm going to go into the details of that. So it applies to all U.S. waters. So any boat in U.S. waters, I believe that's within 12 miles of land. That's our territorial waters. Or any U.S. flagged vessel worldwide. So if you're on your boat and it's American flagged and you're in the Bahamas and the U.S. Coast Guard is there, they can board your boat without any probable cause or anything. And like I said, the reason of that is from the Revenue Act of 1790 to stop smuggling and to collect tariffs. So, tariffs have been in the news a lot lately until I believe the U.S. Income tax, it's happened off and on. I think there was one during the American Civil War to finance the American Civil War. And then in somewhere around 1910, they enacted what we have today as the modern income tax. And so that's the primary way that the U.S. government collects taxes to fund itself and to pay for itself. Some might call it a mafia, some might not. I don't know. Whatever you want to say. I'm just kidding. But until then, the way the government collected almost all of its funds to support itself and to pay for itself was through tariffs. So if you were importing a bushel of wheat or whatever back in 1795 from somewhere else, or you're bringing in rum from the Caribbean or whatever, you had to pay a tariff on that. And so the Revenue Act of 1790 gave the U.S. Coast Guard the right to search any vessel anytime in American waters to detect smuggling. And then this was strengthened again in the 1920s during Prohibition to stop rum runners, right? So you had rum coming in from the Bahamas and you had whiskey coming in from Canada, and it was sailing in on boats being smuggled in. And so the U.S. Coast Guard, that was their mission, is really to stop that at the time. I mean, now they do a lot more than that. They do safety and coast guarding and, all that kind of stuff. But one of their things is to stop smuggling. So like I said, this applies to all U.S. waters and all U.S. flagged vessels. Generally what they're searching for now, they are still looking for smuggling because there's human trafficking, there's drug smuggling and all that. So they're searching for that. But mostly they're just checking to make sure all your safety equipment's on board. You have the PFDs, you have flares, you have fire extinguishers. Is your the seacock for your waste tank closed because you're not supposed to dump that within 2 miles of land. Make sure your documentation is up to date and you've paid all your import duties. So if you're sailing back into the U.S., it's only $26 or something like that, but you have to get from the CBP Customs Border Patrol, you have to get a decal and you pay $26, and it's super easy to do online, but you need to pay that. That's like your user fee basically for coming in and out and doing the border patrol and all that. So the U.S. Coast Guard has more search and power at sea than cops do on land. So that's something really you need to take into consideration. I love seeing there's videos that of people where their vessels being boarded by the Coast Guard. And, they're filming the whole thing saying, you don't have right, search and seizure, and you don't have probable cause, you can't be on my boat. And the Coast Guard's going, look, we don't need it. It's the law. We can board your vessel. Generally, from what I've never been boarded by the Coast Guard, but from what I've heard is that, especially if you're sailing and they want to board your vessel, they just say continue on your current course and heading, don't do anything, and they're going to board your boat, and they'll do it. And they kind of do it as practice. So, all right, the next section I'm going to cover is the salvage law and rewards. So the salvage law is there was a myth, the 33%, right? I always thought that the salvager was entitled to 30% 33% of the post-salvage vessel and then its cargo. But it's actually not. So there's two types of salvage. There's contract salvage, which is like an agreed upon fee. So, for instance, my vessel that was washed up in the on the beach in Malaysia, that was basically an agreed upon salvage with the manufacturer, because the boat was no longer in peril. It was on the beach and we had to salvage it to bring it off. So like that was a pre-agreed salvage fee. And so they're not getting a percentage of the value of the boat because there was no danger, honestly. And I'll get into the whole thing here. And then there's pure salvage, which is there's no contract. If you're in peril and you call for help and somebody helps you, helps salvage a boat and save you, they're entitled to a reward for doing so. And I'll get into the factors on what they're entitled to. So the reward factors are based on the value of the vessel and its cargo, and how much danger and peril was involved in, how much danger was that vessel in at the time it was being salvaged. If you're dead stick drifting to the rocks and it's going to total the boat, well, then they're entitled to a lot more than if you're just running out of fuel and you're just kind of drifting around on a lazy day, right? Also, the risks to the salver. So, like, how much risk are they putting themselves in to rescue the boat? And then the skill and equipment used. I mean, do they need specialized equipment to come save you? Or do they need specialized skill that's not everybody has? And then also environmental protection. Like if it was going to cause an oil spill or something like that, they're entitled to more in reward. So those ranges are basically, so if there's a low risk, so you're on your, Sea Ray and you run out of fuel and you're fine. You're not going to drift into any rocks. There's no danger of capsizing. It's just calm day and you run out of fuel. Well, if I'll get into this in a minute, but like they're entitled to 5 to 10% of the value of the vessel. I'll get into it in just a minute. I'm just telling you what they're entitled to. I would highly recommend you do a prearranged on something like that, because if they just bring you fuel and you haven't prearranged it with them, you can be screwed. So, and if there's moderate danger, so I don't know, the seas are a little more up or something like that, there's a little more danger to the boat, they're entitled to 10 to 25% of the value. And if it's extreme peril, like people are going to die, the boat is going to be totaled, whatever, they're entitled to up to 50%. So I used to think it was 33%, but it's all those. So, so I would highly recommend, if you're going to be boating within the U.S., to either get a it's not a subscription, but it's the Towboat US or Seatow. Get an account with them. It's a couple $100 a year, but it's insurance. You get a policy with them. Thank you. I'm just replying to myself with that. So you get a policy with them, and so if you do run out of fuel, you do have a problem, and they have to come tow you in, it's a policy. So you basically, there may be some kind of deductible, I don't know. But if not, if you don't have that policy, then they're going to charge you a lot of money. I mean, thousands of dollars to come save you. Or like if it's an extreme, so like it's probably just easier for them. If you run out of fuel, it's easier, and you don't have a policy with them, they might charge you a couple $1,000 to come tow you in. It's easier just to for them just to bill you a couple $1,000 is something you can do, than rather than try to put a claim on the boat. But they are entitled to be able to do so. So I would highly recommend that. Or if you do have an issue and you do need to be saved, so think about it. So say you do run out of fuel and some friendly boater comes by and throws you a line and tows you in, he's entitled to like 5 to 10%, and he can sue you for that and take you to court. So have it in writing, have it on camera, verbally saying you're doing this out of the kindness of your own heart, and you're not getting, a salvage cost on it. So for instance, so there's a famous case of the Black Swan, and so they in 2007, a group salvagers found $500 million worth of Spanish gold from a Spanish wrecked ship, like a Spanish royally owned ship, and they were forced to give all that gold back to Spain because Spain claimed that it was a salvage and that they technically own all that gold. And so the salvers in that case, now I don't know, they're at low risk, they're moderate, they're not at low risk because they're diving and doing all that, so maybe they call it moderate risk. So now you're looking at 25%. So now the salvers were expecting to get $500 million, maybe now they're getting $100 million or something like that, which is still like a ton of money, but they don't get to keep the gold. That belongs to Spain, but they get the money for it. Or Spain can give them, I guess, like if they don't want to actually pay them cash, they can let them keep 25% of the gold or whatever it is. But the thing is that you're going to be sued for that. Now then, Then what happened to me is, so I had to cut my dinghy loose 5 years ago when I was in some pretty bad weather and my davits collapsed, and so I had to cut the dinghy loose. Well, unbeknownst to me, somebody found that dinghy, and then so just a few months ago, I get contacted by Highfield. So somebody found the dinghy, and then they kept it and used it. They didn't report it, so legally they were required to report that vessel, the dinghy, as salvaged to the government, the Coast Guard. They didn't. They kept it and used it for themselves, and then they ended up selling that dinghy to somebody else. Then that somebody else contacted Highfield, said, hey, I would like to get the paperwork on this dinghy so that I can register it. And then Highfield contacted me saying, hey, somebody found your dinghy. They were using it, then they sold it. So legally, the people that found it and salvaged it, they were illegal by keeping that dinghy and using it for personal use. What they were entitled to do was put a salvage claim on it and get, 25%, 10% of the value of that vessel. So that's kind of shitty, honestly, because finders keepers, not really. That's not how it works. So I ended up having to buy another dinghy when, in fact, they found my dinghy. I should have paid them 20% of the value of the dinghy and then gotten my dinghy back rather than having to buy a new dinghy. They were illegal in that, and I guess if I really wanted to be an ass about it, I could probably, press charges or something, but whatever. And then, for instance, you probably heard of Wandering Hillbilly. So his boat, he had a $2 million Power Cat and the BBI that it broke off its mooring and then washed up on the beach. Well, so then the salvage company comes in. They, call Mayday, 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 whatever. And the salvage company comes out and then pulls him off the beach and tows him into a marina. Because he didn't have an agreement with them prior to that, now they hit him for a lot, 40% or 30% of the salvage value of the vessel. So after salvage, the vessel's only worth $900,000, $1 million because of all the damage. And then so they hit him for $400,000 or $500,000. But at this point, the boat was already on the beach. It's already screwed. He should have, and I'm not blaming him. I probably would have done the same thing in his case. So now that just because I've been researching this, I'm more aware of my own circumstances. And so I probably would have done the same thing in his case. I would have called for Mayday, whatever, and then, I would have owed him a lot of money. But what should do, if that's the case, unless it's danger, peril, you got to save somebody's life right now, yeah, you just accept the fact that they're going to hit you with a big salvage fee. What you should do is is agree beforehand. I'm going to pay you, $10,000 to come salvage this, $20,000 or whatever, and they can say yes or no at that point. And then, yeah, so anyway. So even at sea, an unsolicited help can come with a bill. All right, so next section, moving on to flags and courtesy rules. So people don't realize this, the national flag, it's supposed to fly off the stern of your boat. You must keep it clean and proper. You can actually get fined for not doing so. The U.S. probably won't do anything with it, but there's been instances in Bermuda and Spain where, okay, so let me just go over the flag types and I'll kind of get into the instances. So you got the national ensign, supposed to fly off the stern of your boat. You have the courtesy flag, which goes on the starboard spreader, and it's generally a mini country flag. Sometimes like the Bahamas has its own courtesy flag. It's red and white with the Bahamas flag in it, and then some other countries have their own different courtesy flags. And then what that means is you fly that when you have cleared into the country. So before clearing into the country, you have to fly a Q flag, which is a yellow flag. You fly it on the starboard spreader, and it's a quarantine flag, meaning we have not cleared in customs, so no one's allowed to leave the boat, and whatever, you got to be inspected or whatever. And then your club flag or your burgee or whatever, you want to fly up, your mascot or you see a lot of college flags, in football teams and all that. That's supposed to go on the port side spreader. It shows you're not it's not a official flag. And so there are some traditions and laws for this. So Bermuda and Spain have fined people for having tattered courtesy flags. Because, when your flag's just flying up there for months at a time, and then, the flag will eventually tatter and kind of shred itself apart. And so they have fined people for having, it's probably, they were probably doing something else and they were just, I mean, you know how it is. It's like, if you're like, I always never understood like people that are like, I don't know, like rude to policemen that are doing something. It's like, if they want to find a way to fine you and like make your life trouble, they can do it. So just be nice to them. You know what I mean? So it's probably something like that. In Turkey, you put up the wrong size, courtesy flag, they can fine you 300 euros. Spain and Corsica, you have the regional flag and the national flag. It does not, so like, you're in Corsica, they have their own cruising flag, and Spain has its own flag. And so like, if you're in Corsica, it's a different thing, so they can hit you with penalties and all that. Now, also, if you put your flag upside down, that means you're in distress. So like, you're trying, maybe you got pirates on board and you're just trying to be sneaky and, you don't want to call for Mayday, but you want to let people know that you're in trouble. Put your flag upside down without them noticing, and people should notice that and be like, hey, his flag's upside down, there might be something wrong. Call the Coast Guard or whatever and have them inspected. But if you do put your flag upside down and it was a mistake, well, now you're getting hit with a penalty for doing so. Because you're causing a false alarm. So that $40 piece of nylon might save you a $400 fine or worse, a visit from the Harbor Patrol. All right, next section I'm going to go into anchoring and restrictions. You have to look on your charts. There's often no anchoring zones, and that could be anything from environmental protection or like they want to protect views, or some resort that has paid off the local whatever to, like, they didn't want, a crusty old boat anchoring off the, the Sandals Resort right there, blocking their view or whatever, so there's stuff like that. And then environmental, like there's seagrass or coral or something like that. And there can be heavy fines for all this. Like in Spain, it's a 6,000 euro fine if you anchor in a restricted area. Special anchorages. So I didn't even know about some of these. I found this the other day when I was pulling into another bay, and it had a special anchoring zone. And I was like, what is a special anchoring zone? So I looked it up. So there are special anchorage zones where you don't have to have a mooring light on at night. So, so then that anchoring zone is marked on the chart. So any boat going through that area needs to understand there might be unlit boats in this special anchoring area. And then, you have day shapes. You don't see it a whole lot. Like technically, you'll see it on super yachts for sure. But technically, so if you look at a super yacht or a big yacht that's a professionally crewed, they're going to have this anchoring shape. So they'll have a black ball on the bow of the boat. And that means you are anchored and not moving and not under control, right? And it's the same thing as having a mooring light on at night. Every boat is supposed to do this technically. Like if somebody were to if there was a collision or something and the insurance gets involved and you didn't have that on, I mean, it could be issue. I mean, like every boat is technically supposed to have it. I don't know any boat under 70 feet that actually does that, but you're supposed to. There's local politics. Many towns ban anchoring unless you rent a mooring ball. They want to make their fee, or they'll stuff the whole bay full of mooring balls so they can collect on it, and then there's no room to anchor. There's a lot of time limits, 24 or 48 hours. Like here I'm in Newport right now. I think they have a 2-week anchoring rule. You're not allowed to anchor more than 2 weeks. There's places where you're not allowed to anchor near like Coast Guard stuff or, secure facilities, stuff like that. And then, like the local, now the Bahamas is charging $200 anchoring fees when it used to be just part of your cruising fee. So, the anchoring laws are always changing. Every state and province is trying to do something different to either limit anchoring or make money off of it or whatever. So it's an ever-changing thing. You got to keep up with it. The ocean may be free, but dropping your hook in the wrong patch of sand could cost you thousands. All right, I think this is my last section. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to go over crew contracts and oddities. So every crew on a professional yacht is supposed to have a contract that lays out their wages, their duties, their rations, and their voyage. And they have the right to desert if the voyage changes. So if they're supposed to be going London to Boston, but then the captain decides to sail to Africa, the crew can jump, they can abandon, they can't really just leave in the middle of the ocean, but they have the right at whatever point that they can to get off the boat without being penalized. And it's an odd requirement. An old law, you used to be required to keep a Bible on a boat as for morale and everything. So a lot of, I don't think it's a law that's still anymore, but a lot of commercial ships just out of, what's the word I'm looking for? Tradition will keep a Bible on there. And so and now the captain's authority is historically absolute. So he is the judge, jury, executioner on the boat, and he can even confine crew to their quarters, or if the boat has a brig, they can do that. Obviously, once you get to shore, things need to kind of figure out what's going on. There might be legal stuff involved, but he has the ultimate say while at sea. He can say, you're not doing your job, or you're unsafe, or whatever. You are confined to quarters for the rest of the journey. And that's the law. You have to do it. So modern quirks, there are STCW regs, safety training. I don't even know what it stands for, but like you got to get all that stuff now if you want to be a crew on a commercial yacht. You get your STC certifications, your safety. I don't know, whatever all that stands for. It has mandatory rest hours that you have to be. Okay, I get so many hours of rest a day or a week, or I get so many days off, stuff like that. And then, so charter yachts must file the crew contracts with the flag state. So, so a lot of private yachts that are so that's kind of the thing. Like, if you're an American registered yacht, I believe your crew has to be legally allowed to work in America. So you can't have an American flag boat and then have, a bunch of Filipino crew that aren't allowed to be in America and work. Even if you're not, so that American boat is in Brazil, right? The crew on that boat has to be American. And just like, if it's a South African flag boat or whatever, or those people have to have the right to work in that country. So there's that's why almost no cruise ships in the United States are registered in the United States, with the exception of Hawaii, because so if a cruise ship leaves out of Miami, it's almost always registered in Panama or the Bahamas or whatever, because now they don't have to hire American crew. If that boat was registered in America, they'd have to hire American crew, which is going to be a lot more expensive than wherever they're getting their crew, Bahamian or Panama or whatever, right? And so that's why, and so being able to do that, so if a cruise ship comes out of Miami, they have to stop in at least one foreign port before returning, because if they just go out and cruise and come back, then they never really checked in somewhere else, so all the crew would have to be American to do that. So that's why they do all that stuff. Let's see here. Yep. All right, it's the captain. Okay, confined. There we go. So in the old days, a captain could sue the captain for too little salt pork. So if it was in their contract that they got two glasses of grog a day, or however much salt pork they were supposed to have, they could sue the captain afterwards and do all that. So these laws range from safety and absurdity and hotels and all that. It's just some of the quirky things that I think you might be interested in about sailing around the world. So, have you ever been boarded by the Coast Guard? Leave me a comment down below. I want to hear about how it happened. Have you ever had to pay or claim salvage? Have you ever had any anchoring fines or flag fines or anything like that? And, what's the weirdest rule you've run into? Leave me a comment down below, and maybe I will touch on it in a coming podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like, I'm going to do the next podcast I'm going to do is going to be an Ask Me Anything. So we're going to answer questions from my patrons and channel members and Sailing Doodles Navy. All those links are popping up there. And so next you can join there, and then I make a post about it, and I will answer your question in the next podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.